If you're anything like me, you've likely struggled over at least one boss fight in the Mario plus Rabbids series. Sparks of Hope has a couple decently challenging boss fights that do take some time to master and defeat. If you're struggling with one of the boss fights in this game, I hopefully got you covered. In this video, I'll be providing you with tips and tricks to defeat each boss fight in this game. However, I will only be focusing on the main 5 boss fights in this game because the Dark Mess ones are more optional. So if you want to find out how to defeat those ones, I'd recommend going somewhere else. Keep in mind with this video that I'm not an expert. I'm really not the best at this game, but I hopefully can give you my knowledge on what strategies worked for me in defeating each boss fight. If you want to see each video where I actually do defeat each boss fight, I'll leave links in the description to my Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope series, where I leave a link to a video of each boss fight I've defeated. That way you can go and maybe try to replicate a certain strategy I used. Otherwise, I will be trying my best to provide you with certain strategies that I think might work, certain team members that I think work best, and all in all, hopefully just trying to help you learn how to defeat these boss fights. There will also be timestamps on screen right now if you want to fast forward to a specific boss fight you are having trouble with. So with that said, let's get on to the video. Giant Wildclaw will be the first boss fight you fight in this game. He's fairly challenging at times, but it's not hard to get a good strategy down. For this boss fight, you are forced to use Edge along with 2 other characters of your choosing. I'd recommend going with characters that have longer range attacks like Mario, Luigi, or Rabbid Peach. This will be best for you because your characters should be fairly spread out on the battlefield. I'll explain why in a sec. It is easier to hit Giant Wildclaw from a distance with characters with longer range attacks. Characters like Rabbid Mario will not bode well for you in this boss fight because he has to get all up close and personal to do some damage. And that's really bad considering Giant Wildclaw moves every time you hit him. So that means every time Rabbid Mario attacks, he's basically doomed to take a lot of damage. This is also why having your heroes stay spread out on the battlefield is a good idea, because then you can more likely get in more attacks, because Giant Wildclaw will be moving in 3 different directions instead of towards one grouping of heroes all at once, and you can most likely stay protected from him by doing this. When it comes to the enemies, it's kind of a judgment call if you feel you should take them out or not. I found when I was playing through the boss fight, I only took out the enemies if they were going to be a big problem for me. If you're behind cover and fairly protected from all the enemies on the battlefield, I find there's really no reason to take them out. Giant Wildclaw should be your main focus. But if you are being surrounded by enemies, it does make a lot of sense to get rid of them, considering they can very easily ruin your run. So to sum up, the strategy that I believe works best with this boss fight is using heroes with long range attacks, having them stay as far apart from each other as possible, and making sure the enemies don't get in your way. If you want to see how I defeated this boss fight, again, there's always a link in the description. Midnite is the second boss fight you will fight in this game. For this battle, you get to use 4 characters instead of the usual 3. You are forced to use Rabbid Rosalina and 3 characters of your choosing. I'd recommend using any 3 characters you'd like, as there are many different strategies that could work, and any characters really work for this boss fight. So whichever ones you're most comfortable with, go ahead and use them. This boss fight has 3 phases, and each one is fairly similar, so what I say for one can be applied to all 3 of them. For each phase, I'd recommend starting by taking out as many enemies as possible. You don't have to take out all of them, but I'd recommend taking out at least half of them. This is because there are so many powerful enemies on the battlefield that they can very easily sneak up on you and defeat you without you even being able to defend yourself. Midnite should really be an afterthought when it comes to this boss fight. When it comes to what to do with each of your heroes, I'd recommend having them split up, but not too far. You want them to stay fairly close together so that you can do stuff like team jumps and all that, but you also don't want them to be right back to back. You want them to be able to spread out and take out other enemies while also being able to reach each other. So anyways, to sum up, I'd recommend having your heroes stay close together, but not too close, taking out all the enemies, and going for Midnite last. Bedrock will be the 3rd boss fight you fight in this game. Once again, you get to use 4 characters instead of the usual 3. You're forced to use Bowser along with 3 characters of your choosing. Once again, I'd recommend using characters with longer range attacks such as Mario, Luigi, Rabbid Peach, or Edge. This is because they will be able to hit Bedrock from farther away instead of having to get up close and personal and risk getting damaged. Because like Giant Wildclaw, Bedrock will move towards you and attack when damaged. The gimmick with this boss fight is that Bedrock is basically immune to all your attacks. Sure, she'll take a small amount of damage, but believe me, you're not going to be able to beat this boss fight with regular attacks. How do you beat Bedrock, you ask? Well, in each of the corners of the battlefield, there are these bombs that set off when Bedrock does the thing where she jumps up and slams into the ground after you attack her. What you gotta do is you gotta lure Bedrock close to these things so that way you can attack her and she will blow herself up. It's fairly simple once you get the hang of it. I'd recommend having all your heroes stay close together and move in the same direction. You want to kind of move around the battlefield in a circle so that way you can hit each explosive. You do want to be careful, however, because sometimes luring Bedrock can be a bit tricky. She may sometimes do the slamming ground thing, whatever the move's name is, and move over the explosives and get too close to you. So you do have to be careful. The enemies don't get in your way too much, and you actually do find quite a lot of time to defeat them considering you don't always want to be attacking Bedrock. So the enemies are kind of afterthoughts in this battle. So to sum up, you want all your characters to stay safe and behind cover and move along the battlefield kind of in a circle in order to lure Bedrock over the explosives and explode her. You also want to stay fairly wary of the enemies, but not worry about them too much as they won't usually get in your way. Wiggler will be the fourth boss fight you fight in this game. For this battle, you now have to use 3 characters instead of 4, but you get to choose any 3 characters you'd like, without any restrictions at all. For this battle, I'd heavily recommend using characters with longer range attacks, such as Mario, Luigi, Rabbid Peach, or Bowser. This is because the main gimmick of the boss fight is you have to shoot these dark mess eyes that are on Wiggler's body, and doing so will be a lot easier if you can hit them from farther away. I would especially recommend using Mario and Bowser for this boss fight, as they can hit multiple targets at once with their 2 weapons, and also hit them from afar as well. The challenge with this boss fight comes from Wiggler constantly moving around the train. You do have to move forward and backwards on the battlefield at different occasions in order to hit the different Dark Mess eyeballs. The enemies are also incredibly annoying with this boss fight. Even though you are technically on a limit with the amount of turns you can use, I would definitely recommend using up some of those turns to take out the enemies, because you should still have enough turns to spare to get rid of all the Dark Mess eyeballs. While this boss fight can be fairly frustrating, I do think trial and error is a big part of it, and sometimes the right thing to do here is just to try out different strategies and see what works. So to sum up, I recommend using characters that can take out multiple Dark Mess eyeballs at once, can hit from farther away, and make sure you definitely take out the enemies whenever possible. The fourth boss fight you'll fight in this game is Daphne. Daphne certainly is one of the more interesting boss fights in this game. Daphne has 3 phases to her boss fight, and each one gets progressively harder, and by a lot too, so you constantly have to stay on your toes. I'll describe each phase separately so that way you can get a feel for how to do each one. First of all, you get to use 3 characters instead of 4 for this boss fight. However, you get to choose all 3 of these characters, so there's no restrictions to who you use. I'd recommend using characters that can move around the battlefield pretty well, so have high movement range, characters like Luigi, or do high amounts of damage, because you will want to do as much damage as possible, so maybe using a character like Rabbid Mario wouldn't be the worst idea. The first phase in the Daphne boss fight is fairly simple. You just gotta get a feel for how the boss fight's gonna be. You want to try and pass over this fairly small battlefield as fast as you can and avoid all the enemies. There aren't many, there are just a few Goombas you should probably be on alert for. You do want to get close to Daphne, and by that I mean behind where the semi-partial cover is, because you're not going to be able to hit her unless you're behind that. When you get close to Daphne, you want to attack her as much as possible. She will inflict some pain on you, but as long as you're careful, you should be fine. I would also recommend using Rabbid Peach in this boss fight, because she can heal all your heroes, so that way you're not always taking damage. Having a healer would be a very good idea for this boss fight. You want to try and basically just kill Daphne before she kills you in each phase. The second phase is slightly more challenging. There are a lot more enemies, and a lot more powerful ones too. What I'd recommend doing is, again, just getting towards Daphne as fast as possible. I'm pretty sure all the enemies are squashettes, so that means once you get to the high ground where Daphne is, you really don't have to worry about them. You don't want to waste your time trying to take out these squashettes. Once again, when you get to Daphne, just inflict as much damage as possible before you lose. Now the third phase is really challenging. You gotta make sure you're on high alert at all times, and what I mean by that is you gotta make sure that you're constantly behind cover. The enemies here will very quickly end your run if you're not careful. I would also recommend being as careful as possible in the first two phases because you'll need as much health as you can possibly get in this phase. There's a long battlefield ahead of you, and once you get to the top, you still got a couple of magicians to look out for, but they won't get in your way that much. It's mostly the Magnafowls that will be in your way during this boss fight. Once you do get to Daphne, once again, it should be fairly simple taking her out, but you do gotta be careful and make sure you defeat her before she defeats you. So to recap, you want to make sure you're being careful and not being too reckless when it comes to getting close to Daphne, but you do want to get towards Daphne as fast as possible. On the third phase, you have to be very strategic. I can't emphasize that enough. You can't risk anything on the third phase. Basically, what you gotta do is you gotta get towards Daphne and just make sure you inflict enough damage on her to the point where you can defeat her before she defeats you. Again, I'd recommend using characters like Luigi that have high movement range, Rabbid Mario that can do a lot of attack damage, or Rabbid Peach that can heal the team. You don't have to use this party exactly, but characters like these would be very useful. Although I would definitely recommend using Rabbid Peach as she is extremely useful in this boss fight. Cursa, the last boss fight you will fight in this game. Cursa is personally my favorite boss fight in the Mario + Rabbids series as a whole. Cursa has 3 phases like Daphne, and each one is drastically different. I'll explain each one separately and good strategies to use for each one and for each of your team members, because you will use every single one of your team members in this battle. All of them are split up across 3 separate battlefields, so that means there are different strategies to use with each team. For starters, I'd recommend splitting up your sparks equally amongst the 3 teams. You gotta remember that you don't want one team being more overpowered than another, because if one team dies, your whole game is over and you gotta start from the beginning. So I'd recommend taking a good amount of time to decide which sparks are best to give to each team member. When it comes to the first phase, your goal is to defeat Cursa's hands, or astral arms, doesn't matter what you say. The astral arms will focus in on one team member at a time across the 3 battlefields. What you gotta do is you gotta jump on the nearest open platform with a team member that doesn't have the arm pointed at them, and then this big spike thing will come up off the floor. With the team member that has the hand pointed at them, you gotta stay behind cover using that spike that just popped up, and then the hand will come down and hurt itself on the spike and it does some damage. You can also just attack the hands normally. That's not how you have to attack them, but it does give you a good amount of damage to deal and helps you with this phase. You also want to be wary of team jumping, because if you team jump too close to the astral arm, it will grab you and deal some damage to you. In phase 2, Cursa comes out to play. What you want to do is you want to make sure you're attacking Cursa at all times. You do want to make sure the enemies aren't going to get in your way, so you could have 1 or 2 team members go for the enemies and 1 go for Cursa, but you do want to make sure Cursa is your main focus, because you want to get Cursa to low health as fast as possible, considering that you don't have much time before Cursa defeats you. Cursa is very powerful, and you want to make sure that you aren't going to lose to her. The third and final phase is kind of similar to the second one, except just a little bit different. Rosalina comes out to play, and you gotta shoot at her 3 wands with each team to therefore power her up to 100% so that she can defeat Cursa once and for all. You do have to do this 3 times, however, because Cursa will block the first 2 blasts. This phase has very similar feel to the second one. What you gotta do is you gotta make sure the enemies won't get in your way, but you do have to make sure you are attacking the wands at all times. I would recommend a similar strategy, like I said before, where you have 1 or 2 team members go after the enemies. Cursa does take a long time to defeat, but once you get a good strategy down, you should be completely fine. It's not really that difficult of a boss fight, but it will require a lot of trial and error. There are specific strategies I'd recommend using within each of your teams. With Team 1, which consists of Mario, Peach, and Rabbid Rosalina, I'd recommend taking full advantage of Peach and Rabbid Rosalina's techniques. Rabbid Rosalina's technique, which freezes all enemies in place that are within range when used, is extremely helpful because you want to make sure you're focusing on the main enemy at hand, Cursa, before you start focusing on the enemies. So freezing them in place is very helpful. Peach's technique, which allows protection to appear for the three heroes, that is if they're in range, is very useful as well because you want to make sure you are being protected at all times. Team 1 is also the only team that carries out damage throughout each phase. What I mean is, for the other two teams, their health resets each time a new phase starts, but with Team 1 it doesn't. So you want to make sure Team 1's staying protected a lot of the time, and make sure that you're using your mushrooms wisely with them. I would recommend using Mario as your main attacker, as he has very high attack damage and can attack multiple enemies at once with his dual slingers. With Team 2, I'd recommend sending Luigi and Rabbid Luigi forward to deal with the boss, while you send Rabbid Mario to deal with the enemies. This works because Rabbid Mario can very easily take care of all the enemies with his very powerful attacks. However, they are short range, which is why I'd recommend having him go by himself, because he does need to get up close and personal with each of the enemies. Luigi and Rabbid Luigi should be fairly good on their own with their abilities to protect themselves and to attack Cursa. Steely Stare and the Weaken ability should be enough to keep Luigi and Rabbid Luigi safe. Now on to Team 3. Team 3 is full of high attackers. Bowser and Edge are known for their high attack power, while Rabbid Peach also can inflict some damage when needed. I'd recommend sending Bowser and Edge out to do as much damage as possible by any means necessary. This could even include taking quite a few risks as well. This is because Rabbid Peach will always be there to heal them whenever needed. Rabbid Peach is the only character in this game that can heal others without needing to use an item such as a mushroom or something like that. Rabbid Peach can heal Bowser and Edge from any damage they might take from any risks they might take. Hopefully that was enough to help you with Cursa. Now let's move on. Well, that about does it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and I do hope this did help you at least a little bit. I hope you did watch to the end if you were stuck on anything, even if it didn't really help you that much, but I hope that some of these tips and tricks will stick with you when you decide to fight the boss fights in this game. I didn't do any of the Dark Mess boss fights because I figured those aren't as significant in the game, and plus, I'm not so good at them myself, and I'm not really qualified to be giving advice about those ones, but maybe someday in the future I will come back to those ones. I might be doing a Kingdom Battle one as well in the future, even though the game is fairly old, but might as well do one. We'll see. I'm not making any promises, but those are some videos that might happen at some point. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time, but until then, keep being awesome Nintendo fans. Peace out.